Okay, here is the project from yesterday. Let me just move this over here. And I'm going to open up the terminal. Hello, Nguyen. So out of curiosity, where are you guys watching from? What city or what country? Because I do these videos late at night, figuring I might get a lot of people on the West Coast, but I'm finding that I might be more people from out of the country overall. So let me know what country or what city you are watching from, and I'll try and tailor the schedule around that. So okay, I'm going to pop a message in the Slack room, making sure everyone knows that this is happening. Okay, great. Okay, so here's the code base from last night. Now, I did make a couple mistakes last night that I want to take care of right away. So first thing I'm going to do is open up the profile model object. And yesterday I had it as module export, and that's a mistake. It should be module exports. So make sure you have that. And actually, I just noticed too, we should change this to profile to keep it consistent. So profile, because the file name is profile, but I called it user by mistake, so that's kind of silly. I don't think that would have made a difference, to be honest, but it's good to be consistent with the naming convention. So this should take care of that. But the bigger problem was the database connection. If you look at the app.js, as it turns out, at least in this case, you do have to specify the actual port number. And in Mongo DB, the default port number is 27017. So if I run the dev server right now, you'll see that the database connection failed because I didn't run the database. If I open up a new tab and run the database, and I try again on the web server, now I get the database success connection, so that's good. So yeah, that's sort of a strange nuance. I'm not really sure why that's happening here, to be honest, but by specifying the port, it takes care of the problem we were having last night. So we can now proceed with a database connection. So that should be good to go. So let's get back to where we left off yesterday. I do think this will be the last part of the tutorial. I think we can finish this up in two parts. So if you look at the auth.js route that we created last night, we basically prepared two routes, a register and a login route. We're going to actually use the register route now to create a user when the user enters the username and a password. So that is now going to be a profile by virtue of this schema right here, which we already imported. And then we will be able to save that to the database and then return the profile to the client side. So let's go ahead and do that and test it out. So let's test that guy out right now. So what we're going to do is grab the body from the request parameters. And let's see here. We're going to create a profile by passing in the request body and then a callback. We're going to create a profile Excuse me, my microphone was broken for a second. I just have to. Okay. This takes an error and a profile callback. Let me know if you can still hear me. If there is an error, we should return a JSON object with a failure confirmation and a message specifying the error. That will make it easier to debug down the road. Thanks, Carlos. Appreciate it. And if there's success, then we should return. Thanks, Mona. Let's see, confirmation, success. And let's return the profile as the data payload. And then comment this out, or we can just remove that altogether because we're done with that. And at this juncture, on the register endpoint, we're creating a profile and storing it to the database. We're not doing anything with the session or anything like that. So this is really just a creation endpoint for now, and that's it. But let's go ahead and test it anyway. And we should get a profile callback object from the success JSON. So let's see here. We are currently running the server, so that's good. Let's open up localhost 3000. So the register endpoint is connected to this, right? So let's go ahead and create a profile. I'm putting in password 12345667, and then join. And then if we open the console, let's see, what do we get here? I may have forgotten the console log on the React side, so that would be kind of silly. So let's see here. That would be the auth.js and auth register. Okay, so here is the call that we just made. And it looks like we're not getting a response in either direction. So let's try it again. So I'm going to reload the page. And this time I'm going to go to the auth backend route. And we don't need to do rec body again here. I'm going to console log over here. Double check. So I'm going to reload the page, clear out the terminal, and we'll do dquan 12345667 for the password. And here is the register, this console log right here. And looks like we're not getting either one of these. So let's see here. Oh, because I put an early return right here. Yeah, I don't know if you guys can see my mistakes. I'm just making like really sloppy mistakes today. It's a long day. You see how I put the return in here in the error block, so there is no success block running at all? It's really hot. I'm sorry. These are just really silly mistakes. So that's the success block. So error and then success. I'm going to console log here anyway, just because I want to be super sure about it right now. Okay. So here, this is because the request hung. I didn't return a response at all. So that's because I was just being really sloppy with my curly braces. So all right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so here is the confirmation. Excuse me. So in reality, the first two requests probably worked as well. I just wasn't returning anything in the success block, so I just created 3 profiles. Not a big deal. But here it is right here. And so the profile creation worked. Steve, I'm using a touchpad. I'm just very tired. That's all, Steve. There's no like, it's not like a, it's all because I'm just very sluggish right now. Kind of weak-headed, lightheaded. So trying to make it through the day. So okay, so it works. That's good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to, let's see here. We're going to create a session here, which will track the current user. So in reality, when you register a profile, that profile should also be logging in at the same time. Otherwise, the user flow is going to be you register and then you have to log in again. Well, I mean, technically that's not terrible. Like there might be like a email confirmation or something like that where you have to click on a confirmation link. By the way, that's a good idea for a more commercial level project. But for something like this, it's just a demonstration. Let's not go through all that. Let's just log the user in on the success block. So right here. So what we're going to use is what's called the Vertex session, which is built into the Turbo SDK. So if we do rec.vertex session, this is just a session object. That's all it is. But it's an object. It's not a string. So you can bind an entire object to it, or you can bind a user or whatever. So I'm going to say user, and then ID equals profile, and then the ID number, which as you can see is returned right. Remove the console log. Okay, I'm going to make that a toString because that's a Mongo ID object. So we're now binding the session to the session a user object, which simply is a JSON object with an ID of the registered user. That way we can return to the browser later, and the session will still be there with the user information. So let's go ahead and test that guy out. So I'm going to now register another profile. Going to mix up the names a little bit. So let's go with LeBron James. And then I guess 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we're going to register that guy. So here is the underscore ID that I was referring to, the Mongo ID. So, oh yeah, Stephen. So just be aware that this is part 2 of a video. So if you did not watch part 1 from last night, then you're gonna have a hard time catching up. So if that's the case, you're better off just watching and just sort of listening, and then go back and watch part 1 later on and fill in the gaps on your own time. Part 1 is on the YouTube channel, so you can catch up that way. So assuming this was successful, the Vertex session, which again is built into the Turbo SDK, is storing the user ID. However, right now we have no mechanisms through which we can check that. Right? We can get the ID. So let's create another endpoint right now. Let's make it a get endpoint, and let's call it current user, where all that's going to do is return the session. That's it. So let's see here. If rec vertex session equals null, okay, so if there is no session, then there's no currently logged in user. So nobody logged in. That's essentially the state there. If the user object on the session is null, same situation. Nobody is logged in. Otherwise, we can return the actual vertex session.user back to the client side. And this is using the current user endpoint on the auth route. So assuming that this worked, we can just test it right in the browser, which is nice. So we do localhost auth current user. And here it is. This is a user object whose ID number should correspond with the most recently registered user, in this case, LeBron James. So right there, if you guys can see those numbers, at least the last 5 or 6 digits, D79E1, D7. So the session did, in fact, successfully bind. So that's good. So now we have a quote-unquote logged-in user. So that's great. while we're here, may as well just take care of this real quick because it's easy. I'm going to create a logout root. So create a get for that. And to log a user out, you just take the vertex session and we reset, and that's it. And then we return some sort of confirmation. And return null. Return null for the user object, and we should be good to go. Great. So that's a quick, easy way. So let's go ahead and test that as well. So right now I'm going to reload the auth route and then the current user route, excuse me. And then I'm going to test the logout endpoint, which returns a null for the current user. And then if I go back to the current user route, it is now null because I've logged out. So that successfully worked. So that's good. That's good to go. And then, excuse me. And then while we're here, let's go ahead and take care of that for the login as well. So here, the login route doesn't do anything. It just returns the data. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the user from the database based on the username that's passed in from the request body. So let's go ahead and parse that out. And then we're going to grab the username. And then we're going to grab the profile whose username corresponds to this. So let's go ahead and do that. So profile get. That will be, I'm sorry, not get, find. That will be username. And this is going to return an array of profiles. Keep that in mind. If error, let's just take care of the error situation real quick. So just return a failure confirmation. Message, error message. Okay, and then in the success block, we want to do a few things here. We want to check the length of the profile. So if profiles length is 0, then what this means is that the profile with the corresponding username has not been found. So we just return an error message to that effect. So just return an error. But this time you can just sub in your own message, profile not found, right? Let's grab this. And then let's grab the profile from the array. We'll just assume the first one for now. And then here, we should normally check the password. But right now, I'm just going to return the profile as is. So just to test it out. So OK, so we should leave a little to-do message right here saying check the password. But first, let's just test this basic endpoint to make sure it works, right? So this is going through a post request. So what we want to do is go back to our React auth.js component and test it over here, right? Because it's already connected. So we may as well go ahead and test that right now. So let's open up our console. OK, so we have LeBron James registered right now. So let's go ahead and reload the site and pass in LeBron James. Now remember, we're not checking the password, so it doesn't really matter what I enter here. And then here we go. That's a success callback from the login route. So that worked. Let's test a couple more things real quick. Let's test a user that doesn't exist. So if we just pass in some gibberish, see what happens here. Profile not found. Very good. OK, so that's good. And then let's go ahead and check the password now. So here, const password. OK, and then if profile. So right now, these passwords are not hashed, right? So, you know, this is not certainly not industry best practice. We're just getting through a simple implementation here. So normally these passwords would be hashed. Depending on how fast we get through this, I may or may not hash the passwords later on. But in this case, we're just using plain text, which again is not industry best practice. So incorrect password. Okay, so here we are just checking passwords. Now we can double check that. Okay, so let's see here. Let's reload the page and put in LeBron James. And then here I'm deliberately entering the wrong password. And then incorrect password. And then let's enter the correct one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there we go. There we go. Now we get the user back the full profile based on the fact that it's the correct password. Okay, good. And then last but not least, and remember, we're not really done, right? Because if we check the current user right now, it's still null, because at no point do we set the session. So let's go ahead and do that. So set the session. So right here, that would happen. So that would be ID equals profile underscore ID. Wow, that was all sorts of wrong. And then to string. Okay. Okay, and this is effectively consummating the process. Like this is actually logging the user in. So now, one more thing I want to do. Actually, let's go ahead and test it first. So I'm currently not logged in as anyone. If I log in as LeBron James, we get the success callback. And then here in the current user, we get the user ID. So it worked. So that's good to go. But one more thing I want to do is on the inside this current user endpoint right here, instead of just returning the session with the user ID, like just this right here, it's not very informative. Let's actually grab the entire user. So let's do this. So we do profile find by ID, and then we pass in the ID from the session, right? That's going to be the user key, and then we error profile. If there is an error, we just do the standard failure blocks. And then inside the success block, this time, instead of returning just the session user and then the ID key, this time we can return the entire user because we just grabbed it, assuming that this code is mistake-free. So let's go ahead and try that out. Okay, so now we get the entire user, and so it worked. So if I reload the current user, I see the currently logged in user. I'm going to log in. I'm going to register as a whole different user this time. So let's try Steph Curry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's register Steph Curry. And that's successful. So now if I reload the current user, now remember, in the register auth route, it also sets the session. So if I reload, I'm now logged in as Steph Curry, and that worked. And then if I log out, that erases the session. And then if I do current user, I'm still logged out. And then if I log back in as Steph Curry this time, but I'm going to enter the wrong password, I get the incorrect password. And then if I now enter the correct password, here is the success block, and here is the session. Great, everything is good to go. We have our auth route doing at least what we need to at a bare minimum right now. So again, just to be clear, I would normally hash passwords here, but I want to focus more on the React side. than on the backend stuff. So these routes are now successfully returning the data that we need. So now what we want to do is use the Redux flow to reflect the state of that data. So for example, when I'm logged in here, I should see some sort of notification saying like, welcome back LeBron James, welcome back Steph Curry, or whatever, right? So let's go ahead and set that up. So here we have our bootstrap, columns and rows. I'm going to make this a column 4, just make a minor adjustment. And then I'm going to add another column here. Make that a column 6. And then it's going to say welcome. And then, oh, I'm not running Webpack, right? So let's go ahead and run the Webpack. So npm run dev. Okay, there we go. And then run the server. Here we go. So now what we want to do is we want to detect when the user is logged in. And if the user is logged in, I want it to say, welcome LeBron James, welcome Steph Curry, et cetera, et cetera. So I want it to reflect who the logged in user is. So hopefully that makes sense. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to log the user out so that we start from a clean slate. Okay, so right now there is no current user. Okay, great. So now what we want to do is that here on the login event, the successful callback is right here, line 45. And inside that data is, I believe, a user key. I forget, so we're just going to have to go off my memory on this. So const user data user. So if the response returns a user key, that is the currently logged in user, the full JSON of that current user. So what we want to do next is we want to take that user and pass it to the Redux store, and that transaction happens through an action, and this user represents the current user. So what we want to do is pass it through the Redux store, pass it to the Redux store using an action indicating somehow that the current user has been received. So I'm actually just going to create the action with that exact name, current user received. So let's go with, inside the actions file, let's go with current user received. And this is just a function. And this returns a type and the data object, which is going to be the user. And the type is simply the name of the action. So actions have names in a Redux architecture. So in this case, we're going to call it current user received. Let's get rid of all this commented out code because right now it's not necessary. Okay, and then this current user received type, action type, can be registered inside of our reducers, which will then process the data into the store. So right now we have a reducer directory with one reducer called the user reducer conveniently. So let's go ahead and use that. Let's open that up. Let's get rid of this template code. And let's get rid of a lot of this stuff. Okay. And let's set up a case for the current user received, which corresponds to the action type that we just created in the previous file. So when this action is invoked, or dispatched is the better way to phrase it, when this action is dispatched, this reducer case will be invoked. And we want to be very sure about that by just running a console log, just to be, really sure about it. So here, I'm just going to JSON console log the action, which has a data key, and don't forget that that's this right here, which represents the currently logged in user. So that should console log the currently logged in user. So let's go back to our terminal, make sure Webpack didn't crash. So Webpack is still happy. So now if I go back to my auth.js, keep in mind, we're not actually calling that action yet. So we have to now connect this action to this component by going down to the, oh, we didn't do any connect yet. So now we need to connect this component entirely to the Redux store using a connect function from the React Redux library. So here, we want to import connect from React Redux. I believe this is that. Sometimes I forget. Yeah, that's right. Okay. And then we need to actually import the actions as well. And I believe that is 2 levels up. Okay. So now we have the connect and the actions imported into this component, which we're going to need. So let's head back down to the bottom and let's connect this component to the Redux store. And that requires 2 functions, state to props. And in the state to props function, we need to specify which reducers we specifically want to reference in this component. Well, we only have one reducer, the user reducer, right? And if we look at the store right here, you will see that the user reducer is binded to the store as underneath the reducer key. So what we want to do is specify that we want the user key from the store, or in this case, the state. And then now we need another function called dispatch to props. Which is where we can connect the actions to this component so that the component can dispatch actions. Right, so in this case, the action we want to use, we only have one, but current user received is right here. And this takes a dispatch argument. So we run the dispatch, and then we grab the actions, and then we tell it to invoke the same action, or the action with the same name. Now, you may recall the action itself requires a user argument, so don't forget to pass that in. Otherwise, the current user won't be passed through. Kind of defeats the purpose, obviously. So now we need to connect using the connect function from React Redux. To props, dispatch to props, and then the auth component. And then this will literally connect the auth component to the Redux store, which is right here, as well as the actions for dispatch. So now these keys on lines 93 and 99 become properties on this component. That's why it's called to props, because the component now receives, in this case, 2 new properties with these names, user and current user received. So right now, I'm just going to test this one, the current user received. So if I go back here in the login callback, we can now call the current user received action. But keep in mind, it is a property on the component. So we do this.props, and then current user received, and then we pass in the user. That's why we have to do this.props, because the framework, the React Redux framework, or in this case, the Connect library, applies those attributes as properties on the current component. So this is enough to actually test right now because we do have a console log right here. So assuming Webpack didn't crash, which it didn't, we can go ahead and test it out by logging in a user. So let's do LeBron James. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you see, this is the one that matters here. I don't know if you can see, but you see how it's coming from the user reducer file, line 14 specifically on the user reducer JavaScript file, which is right here. That means it worked. That means this state was successfully mutated or updated at least with the current user, in this case, LeBron James. And if I check the current user route, I am logged in, so that's good. Or LeBron James is logged in. I'm certainly not LeBron James. So that's good. That worked. So now what that means is, once the user has been binded to this the store right here, the state, excuse me, we can now reference that inside of our component here. So by virtue of the state to props using this user key. Now keep in mind, this is just a representation of the user reducer. And the user reducer has a current user key. And also this attribute is applied as a property on the component. So what that means is we can reference that property right now. Const current user equals this.props and then user and then current user. But keep in mind that can be null. Like you don't have to have a current user. The current user might be nobody because nobody's logged in. So can be null, right? So then what we can do is inside this here, we can create a conditional. Let's see, current user is null. We don't render anything at all. But otherwise, we render this welcome message with the current user, and then I believe it's a username key, right? Yep, username. Username, like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out, and then I'm going to log back in as Steph Curry this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then welcome Steph Curry. So I don't know if you guys got that, but that's essentially a full cycle of the one-way data flow. We took some data from the component, posted it to the backend returned some more data, we hit the store with it, the store re-rendered, and therefore we saw this. So that was successful. Now there are a couple areas that we didn't cover for. So right now I am currently logged in as Steph Curry, as you can see. So I am currently logged in. So that means if I reload this page, this should still be here, but it won't be. You guys see that? It went away. That's because right now we're setting the current user only in the login path, the login function, excuse me. So what we need to do is somehow identify whether or not there's a current user before any action has taken place. So that is also why I set up the current user endpoint, so we can do that. So what we want to do is hit this endpoint as soon as this component loads. So we can do that through a lifecycle method called component did mount. Let's go ahead and do that. So once the component mounts or just shows up, once the component appears, whatever code we place in here will be immediately invoked. So what we want to do is check the current user, right? So we have an HTTP module where we can make HTTP requests. And we want to hit that endpoint. Well, this is a promise, right? So there's no params. So user. Okay, so here, console log, let's just console log for now. So current user. Right now, as soon as the site loads, it will do an immediate check for the current user. And if that current user is logged in, we will get the JSON for that user. So here we go, right here. I just reload the page and the current user is immediately returned because I am logged in right now as Steph Curry, or Steph Curry is logged in. So that being said, we can then pass this data through the dispatch cycle again using pretty much the same function, current user received, like so. And in doing so, that welcome sign will show up right away. Welcome, except it doesn't say welcome Steph Curry. So let's figure out what's going on there. Username Steph Curry. So let's see, username. See what we get here on the render. It should say welcome Steph Curry. So render. And there it is right there. And I'm getting the entire object back. So that's the problem. So let's see here. What did we do wrong? So in here, inside this right here, it's not the entire user, it's the entire response. And then if you look at the response itself contains a user key. So we want to do response.user like that. So JSON parsing 101. My apologies. Alrighty. That worked. However, that parsing should have been done on the library itself. So let me just double check this because that's not really consistent. So inside the HTTP library, it should have been done right here. So let's see if I'm doing something wrong here. Here it is. So that's right, and then the entire body. So let's try that. Here it is. Oh, no, that's fine. All right, that's all right. Okay, so we'll go with that for now. Let's see. I'm going to get rid of this console log. And let's get rid of the render console log. Get rid of that entirely. And we'll leave this guy behind for now. Okay, great. So I'm now logged in as Steph Curry. I'm going to log in as LeBron James. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then log in, and now it changes. But furthermore, much more importantly, is when I reload the page, it'll stay as LeBron James. And that's a successful login flow. Now, you may recall one thing we left out is the register sequence right here. So basically, we just have to do the same thing. We just grab the current user from the data. That's what it was. Yeah. So we did the same thing over here. So I just lost track of that. And then we call the current user received action again upon the register callback. So we can now register another user. So let's do James Harden. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it should change, except it didn't. So let's see here. Current user received. That's from the first callback, second, and then. So here we're getting a problem. You see that on the action second time around. So let's see. This is the response. Oh, and here it's coming back as data instead of user. Inconsistent. So inside the auth, if we go to register, we have this returned as data instead of user. It really should be user. So I don't know if you guys see that. Right here is the problem. So that's why I didn't parse all the way through. So that means let's try it again. I mean, it did work on the second time because the session was binded, but let's create a whole nother user and let's try it again. So Kevin Durant, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there we go, Kevin Durant. It worked. And then if I reload the page, we should be good to go. And yeah, and that's it. So this is a very high-level overview. It's a very simple overview of a React Redux login flow using Redux to maintain the state. In this particular case, it was a bit of an overkill because we only have one component, right? So normally we wouldn't use Redux here. But then again, how many projects do you know that only have one component anyway? So this is still a good practice for Redux. However, there are more important things to point out that I didn't do that I normally would do that I should do. Most notably on the back end, I didn't hash the passwords. I would imagine that's obvious. So make sure you, on your own projects that you do for real, hash the passwords. The reason I didn't do it because it has nothing to do with React or Redux. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time on something that doesn't apply specifically to what this tutorial is supposed to be about. But rest assured, you should normally hash the passwords. And I normally use the bcrypt.js library, which is pretty good for that purpose. Number two, these HTTP calls I normally wouldn't do right here in this fashion. I would use what's called async actions for this. But an async action, async meaning for asynchronous, an async action is not a beginner level concept. So I didn't want to do too much too soon, so to speak. Basically, what that means is it's kind of what it sounds like. It's an asynchronous action, but however, this entire sequence, this entire flow of data should happen through the actual actions itself. So a lot of this code here, or just about all of this code, to be honest, belongs inside the actions. And then the actions should basically have handlers for asynchronous callbacks. And now that's an asynchronous action. But an async action is a little bit tricky for beginners, and it certainly was for me at least. So I didn't want to bog this tutorial down with async actions. So what I did here is I kind of cheated a little bit, and I just ran the asynchronous calls inside the component itself, very much like Ajax. This is pretty much like an Ajax call. And then I just ran the actions synchronously on the callbacks themselves, which is easier to grasp conceptually. And for a beginner, it's fine. It still makes sense. But as you get more and more deeper into your React Redux work and start doing things on a more more professional level, more higher skill level, this really should be done through an async action. So I want to be clear about that. That would be this guy right here, this guy right here. That would be an async action, and this guy right here would be an async action. So these function calls would have names, corresponding names inside the actions file themselves, like login, logout, register, etc. And then the actions would be implemented asynchronously, which is a little bit tricky inside of a Redux architecture. So hopefully that makes sense. I encourage you to go to look into it on your own and really try to wrap your head around that and try to figure out the nuances behind that. Maybe not right now. I would recommend you do that after getting some practice in on here. If you found this tutorial a little bit fast-paced, a little bit hard to follow, then you might want to just go through it a couple more times before you start moving on to async actions, which is a little bit more tricky, a little bit more intricate. So yeah, hopefully you got all this working. I'm going to post all this code on my website soon, and then And yeah, that'll be it for this short snippet of topics. So I'm trying to do more tutorials in shorter segments. So 2 to 3 pieces instead of like my usual 8 to 10 sections. So basically I'm picking small bite-sized topics and just banging out like short tutorials, 2-3 videos across the 2-3 days. So I can do roughly 2 a week, 2 or 3 a week. So hopefully you guys like that idea. Let me know if you have any topic suggestions or anything like that. And yeah, that's it. So that'll wrap it up for this one. And hopefully you got everything working. I'll post the code on my website, turbo360.co. And shoot me a message or a message on Slack or YouTube or something like that if you have any questions or suggestions or anything of that sort. So, yep, that's it. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you got everything working, and I'll catch you in the next tutorial.